Why she couldn't resist the alien's pull. Is it love or desperation? Imagine this. What if one day, love didn't come from your heart, but from a distant star, millions of light years away? Could you love a creature not of your own kind? Or would the vast differences between you tear that love apart? What if, against all odds, the most unexpected love story of your life unfolded in the silent reaches of the cosmos? One rainy night, I received a message unlike any I'd ever heard. It wasn't from anyone I knew, it didn't even come from Earth. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about love began to shift. This is where the story began. A love story that transcends space, time, and everything we thought possible. Between me and someone who wasn't even human. As we journey through this story, one question lingers in the silence of the universe. Can love really know any boundaries? The cosmos stretched infinitely in every direction. A vast ocean of stars that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. In this vast, silent expanse, the Nerva, a massive, state-of-the-art alien vessel, glided through the void like a phantom in the night. Its sleek, dark surface gleamed in the light of distant suns, while its interior hummed with technology that humans could scarcely begin to understand. The ship's destination? A planet in a distant star system. One that had long been deemed uninhabitable by the far-reaching sensors of Earth's explorers. Yet, for reasons only known to the commanders of the Nerva, it was there that the most unexpected encounter was about to unfold. Evelyn Carter had always been an explorer at heart. A woman from Earth, with her strikingly beautiful features, eyes as large and expressive as the oceans she'd never seen, and long, jet-black hair that cascaded down her back like the darkest night. She had spent her life on the frontier of technology, developing new systems for humanity's first interstellar explorations. Her body, though soft and graceful, was armored with the quiet strength of someone who had trained for both intellectual and physical challenges. Her high-tech suit, a marvel of human engineering, hugged her form perfectly, accentuating her curves, while remaining a stark contrast to the cold, clinical environment around her. The suit's design was as much a piece of art as it was armor. A balance between futuristic utility and feminine elegance. She floated through the ship's corridors, her boots making no sound against the metallic floor. Her presence quiet, but impossible to ignore. The mission she had been sent on was simple in theory. Investigate the uncharted planet, gather data, and determine if it could support human colonization. But, what she didn't know was that her fate would soon intertwine with something far beyond her wildest imagination. The ship's artificial intelligence, Azura, softly echoed in Evelyn's earpiece. "We are nearing the planet, Captain. Current atmospheric readings suggest that it is habitable. However, there are anomalies on the surface that have not been documented." Evelyn's hand moved instinctively to the sleek communicator at her wrist, adjusting its settings. "Keep monitoring, Azura. I'll prepare for the landing. Activate the landing gear." "Affirmative, Captain," Azura responded, her voice the only thing that broke the silence of the ship. But as Evelyn prepared herself for the descent to the planet's surface, a strange pulse reverberated throughout the ship. A ripple of energy, almost like a wave, coursed through the vessel. The lights flickered for a moment, before returning to their usual steady glow. Evelyn froze. She could feel the hair on the back of her neck prickle. And a sense of someone watching her settled over her. Her pulse quickened. On the distant planet's surface, Kale stood in the shadows, his violet skin shimmering faintly under the planet's strange twin moons. His towering, muscular form was draped in advanced armor of his own. An intricate fusion of alien technology and organic material. His sharp, almost otherworldly features, reminiscent of the ancient warrior races, were set in a determined expression. His eyes, glowing softly with an inner light, observed the incoming vessel with focused intensity. Kale was no ordinary being. As one of the elite sentinels of his species, he was gifted with abilities that defied comprehension. Telepathic communication, the power to manipulate light and sound, and the ability to move through space with an almost supernatural grace. His society had evolved in harmony with the cosmos, learning to tap into the energy fields that bound the stars together. But this presence, this human who dared enter their sacred world, was something entirely new. The air hummed as he reached out with his mind, sensing her even before her ship touched the planet. Her thoughts were alien, chaotic, yet strangely familiar. And there was something about her, a force, a pull that he couldn't ignore. As Evelyn descended into the planet's atmosphere, she was unaware that she was about to meet the first of her kind, a being not bound by the same rules of existence that shaped humanity. And yet, the pull between them would be undeniable. As her ship touched down on the planet's surface with a gentle thud, the distant sound of Kale's footsteps reached her ears. Her instincts screamed at her to be alert, to be ready. But there was also something else. An undeniable, almost magnetic curiosity that began to grow within her. She had prepared for this moment, for the unknown. But she hadn't prepared for him. The hatch of her ship opened with a hiss. And she stepped out, her boots making contact with the alien soil. The landscape stretched out before her. A surreal mixture of alien flora and sharp, rocky outcrops. The air tasted different, electric, alive. Her gaze scanned the horizon, searching for any signs of life. And then, from the shadows, he emerged. Kale. The moment their eyes met, the world seemed to pause. For a split second, Evelyn forgot to breathe. He was tall, impossibly tall, with an air of quiet power that seemed to reverberate through the very ground she stood on. His violet skin shimmered in the light of the two moons, his eyes glowing faintly as he regarded her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. Their gazes locked. Neither of them moved. The encounter was unlike anything Evelyn had ever experienced. The alien presence before her wasn't just physical, it was felt in the air. There was a hum in the atmosphere, as if the planet itself had drawn a deep breath in anticipation. She could sense the pull between them. The way their bodies responded to each other's presence, subtle, but undeniable. Her heart raced, and she could feel the heat rising in her chest. She knew that this moment was the beginning of something entirely new. This wasn't just an alien species. This wasn't just another mission. It was him. And the storm inside her began to rise. The tension between Evelyn and Cale hung thick in the air, as palpable as the strange energy that pulsed beneath their feet. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. The rhythmic thumping a stark contrast to the unnerving stillness of the alien planet. His presence was commanding, almost overwhelming. And yet, there was something undeniably magnetic about him that she couldn't pull away from. Cale took a slow step forward, his glowing violet eyes never leaving hers. He was a creature of both power and grace. His movements fluid and deliberate, as though he was acutely aware of the delicate balance between them. Two beings from different worlds, drawn together by something neither could explain. The air seemed to hum around them, a quiet song of the universe that echoed through the silence. Evelyn's mind raced, torn between curiosity and caution. She had never imagined this moment, never imagined him. His features were striking, his skin shimmering under the pale glow of the twin moons. A perfect blend of alien elegance and strength. His armor, intricate and sophisticated, clung to his form, revealing his muscular physique. The light reflecting off its smooth, organic surfaces. He was unlike anything she had ever seen, both beautiful and terrifying. Cale stopped a few paces away, his gaze intense. Yet there was an odd softness in it, an emotion she couldn't quite place. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that sent a flush of warmth to her cheeks. The feeling was sudden and foreign, and Evelyn found herself unable to hide the flicker of discomfort that followed. She wasn't used to feeling exposed, to feeling like someone could see right through her, as though they could look into the very depths of her soul. But in his eyes, she felt seen. It was a sensation that both frightened and exhilarated her. Her breath hitched slightly as he spoke, his voice a rich, melodic cadence that seemed to reverberate deep within her chest. "You are not like the others." Evelyn swallowed, her throat dry as she found her voice, trying to steady her nerves. I don't know what you mean." "You are different," Cale repeated, his voice holding an edge of something she couldn't decipher. "The way you carry yourself, the way your mind works. It is not like any human I have encountered." Evelyn narrowed her eyes, trying to maintain her composure. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Cale stepped closer, closing the gap between them just a fraction, his presence filling the space with a suffocating energy. The proximity made Evelyn's pulse quicken, her senses heightened. She could smell him now. A strange, earthy scent that mixed with the fresh, alien air. A heady blend of something distant, foreign, and yet oddly comforting. His eyes flickered with something unreadable before he answered, his voice quieter now, almost intimate. "You feel different. Like you are not just a human. You carry a power within you, one that calls to me." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The words hung in the air like a challenge, an invitation to understand something deeper. Something hidden beneath the surface. There was an undeniable pull between them. A force that neither of them could explain, let alone control. She swallowed again, unsure how to respond. Her mind was still reeling from the realization that she wasn't just standing in front of an alien being. She was standing in front of someone who could feel her, who seemed to sense every shift in her energy. The silence stretched on. Both of them locked in a moment that felt as though it could last forever. Kale, sensing her hesitation, took another step forward. His movements were fluid, effortless, like the natural rhythm of the universe itself. He was close now, so close that Evelyn could feel the heat emanating from his body. The magnetic pull of his presence drawing her in. Her heart pounded in her chest, a primal reaction she couldn't control. There was a magnetic force between them. An invisible tether that kept her rooted to the spot. She could feel his gaze on her, the weight of it pressing against her skin. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn was acutely aware of the vulnerability that came with being seen in such a way. There was something intensely seductive about the way he looked at her, as if he could see into her very essence, unraveling the tightly woven layers she had spent a lifetime building. And then, almost as if he were reading her mind, Kale spoke again, his voice low, reverberating like a soft whisper that wrapped around her very being. "You fear me." The words were not accusatory, but rather a quiet observation. Evelyn felt a wave of heat wash over her. A mixture of confusion and something more intense. Something deeper. Fear. Yes, perhaps. But also something else. Curiosity. Desire. Maybe. She answered, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't understand you. I don't understand any of this. Kale took another step closer. And this time, there was no denying the proximity. His aura, his very presence, enveloped her. The subtle hum of the planet beneath them seemed to respond to him, vibrating in the air around them, creating an electric pulse that matched the rising tension between them. "I am not like any other being you have known," Kale said, his voice a soft promise. "I come from a place where the laws of attraction are not just physical. They are elemental. Our beings are intertwined with the fabric of the universe itself. And when two souls meet like ours have, they are drawn together. Not just by proximity, but by something much older. Something primal." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the heat rising between them. Could feel the air growing heavier, charged with 1,000 unspoken words. Her heart pounded in her chest, the rhythmic thumping of it synchronizing with the pulse of the planet beneath them. Kale's gaze never wavered. His eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, never left hers as he slowly extended a hand toward her. The gesture was almost delicate, as if he were waiting for her to choose. "Will you let it happen?" he asked. The question a challenge, an invitation, and a plea all wrapped into one. Evelyn stared at his hand, the tremble of her breath betraying the storm of emotions brewing inside her. Could she take that step? Could she allow herself to fall into the unknown? Her hand trembled as she slowly reached out, her fingertips brushing against his. The moment their skin met, a shock of energy coursed through her, as if the universe itself had just ignited within her chest. And as the world around them faded away, only the two of them existed in that moment. The alien and the human, bound together by forces far greater than either could understand. The air around Evelyn felt thick with a powerful energy, charged with the aftermath of their kiss. Her skin buzzed with the sensation of his touch, the heat of his body still radiating against hers. She stood there, unable to break free from the pull that seemed to magnetize them together. Every part of her, every nerve, was attuned to Kale. His presence overwhelming, yet comforting in a strange, foreign way. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, gazing at one another. The tension between them still crackling in the air, like static electricity. Evelyn's heart was still racing, her chest rising and falling with each breath, as if it had been stolen by the force of the kiss. She couldn't explain it. How could she? He was completely beyond everything she had ever known. He wasn't just from another planet. He was otherworldly in every sense. His presence all-encompassing, almost divine. Kale's violet eyes searched hers, his expression unreadable. But there was something deeply intense, a quiet understanding passing between them. His fingers gently brushed against the curve of her cheek, sending a shiver of warmth down her spine. He was studying her, waiting for her, as though every moment was delicate, and he didn't want to overwhelm her. "You are not like the others," Kale murmured softly, his voice vibrating through the air, both possessive and gentle. He slowly lowered his hand, the fingers of his other hand still lingering at the edge of her arm, as if reluctant to break the contact, to sever the intimate connection between them. Evelyn blinked, feeling as though her world was tilting. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to find her voice. Her chest was tight, her thoughts tangled. The warmth from their kiss still lingered. And yet something deeper had shifted. Something not yet understood. She could feel it, a kind of awakening inside her, as if her very soul had responded to him. Kale let out a quiet sigh, his expression unreadable. His long, angular features softened slightly. As he took a step back, his eyes never leaving her face. "You feel the pulse of the universe, the hum that connects us all." His words were soft, almost like a confession. "That pulse, that rhythm of life, is what binds us. What binds all beings, regardless of our origins. But your energy, it is different. I can feel it. I have never encountered a human like you." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat at the intensity in his voice. There was a power behind his words that shook her, making her question everything she thought she knew about herself. The thought that she, just a human, could possess something otherworldly. It felt impossible. Yet in his eyes, it seemed so real. She shivered involuntarily at the thought. "What do you mean? How am I different?" she whispered, though she feared the answer. Kale's gaze darkened with something deep, as if he were about to share a truth that was not meant to be spoken. He took a step closer, his body drawing hers in, the space between them shrinking, the pull of their connection more magnetic than ever. "Your species is connected to the universe in ways you have yet to understand. The energy that courses through you, it is unlike anything I've felt. It is not just physical, but something far deeper." His voice was thick, heavy with meaning, but also with longing. Evelyn took in his words, the gravity of them sinking into her chest. What was he saying? Was she truly different from all humans? Was there something inside her that connected her to him? To this alien world in ways beyond comprehension? She could feel the truth of his words in her bones. The realization slowly unfolding within her. Kale reached out, his fingers grazing the edges of her suit. The fabric humming with energy as his touch connected with the material. It wasn't just his physical touch that sent a shiver down her spine. It was the strange energy that crackled beneath it. A sensation so alien, yet so intimate. This suit, this technology that binds you. It cannot shield you from what is truly inside you, Evelyn. He lowered his gaze briefly to the sleek, tight-fitting armor she wore. You have a power that cannot be hidden by technology. And I have known, since the moment I first sensed you, that this connection between us was no accident. Evelyn's breath quickened, her pulse racing as she tried to understand the magnitude of what Kale was saying. He wasn't just speaking of physical attraction, this went beyond that. He was talking about something fundamental, something primal. That went deeper than any species, any planet, or even the laws of physics. She stepped back, trying to collect herself, her mind whirling. You're telling me I'm not like other humans? But how could that be possible? I was born on Earth. Kale's eyes softened as he approached her again. His movements slow and deliberate. Almost as though he were afraid to break the fragile moment between them. You are of Earth, yes. But there is something about you that the universe recognizes. He paused for a moment, as if collecting his thoughts. My people, we are connected to the stars in ways that humans cannot yet comprehend. We communicate not just through words, but through energy. Through essence. Through touch. He reached out to gently touch her face, tracing her features with a tenderness that felt like a secret. And when I touch you, when I am near you, I can feel your soul. I can feel your essence vibrating with the same pulse. Evelyn's heart skipped in her chest at his words. His touch, gentle and purposeful, seemed to ignite something deep within her. She couldn't deny it, she felt the same. There was a part of her that was awakening to the truth of his words. A part of her that wanted to break free of all that was familiar. To step into this new world he was showing her. Her breath came in shallow bursts as Kale's fingers slid slowly down her cheek, tracing the curve of her jaw. His touch sending sparks of warmth through her body. It felt like something ancient, something that had always been meant to happen. And yet she could hardly believe it. Evelyn. Kale's voice was barely a whisper. His lips close to her ear. Let me show you. Let me help you understand. Her heart raced as his words sank in. Her body trembled. A mixture of excitement and fear bubbling within her. Could she let herself fall into him without understanding everything? But there was no going back now. The connection between them was undeniable. Her heart, her mind, and her very soul were already attuned to his. And as his lips brushed against her neck, sending a wave of heat through her entire body, Evelyn realized she was no longer the same woman who had landed on this alien planet. She had already crossed a line. One that would bind her to Kale in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The journey they were about to embark on wasn't just physical. It was a journey of the soul. One that would challenge their understanding of love, power, and the very nature of existence itself. The kiss had been gentle at first, tentative, as though both of them were testing the waters of the strange connection between them. But now, with each passing moment, the world around Evelyn seemed to fade even further into the background. The planet, the strange alien landscape, the ship, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the heat of Kale's touch. The magnetism that seemed to draw them together. Kale's lips, warm and inviting, were moving against hers now with more urgency. His hands sliding around the back of her neck. His fingers threading through the soft strands of her black hair. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Her body responding before her mind could fully process the whirlwind of emotions that were flooding her. Every touch felt electric. Every sensation heightened by the proximity of his alien form. She could feel the strength of him. His body, solid and firm against hers. It wasn't just physical attraction anymore. It was something deeper, more visceral. Something ancient. She could feel his pulse against her, syncing with her own heartbeat. As if their bodies had been made to resonate together. Evelyn pulled back slightly. Her mind spinning. Trying to make sense of the overwhelming sensations that were taking over her. "Kale," she whispered, her voice breathless. "This. I don't know what this is. What we are. This connection, it's unlike anything I've ever felt." Kale's eyes darkened. And he stepped even closer. His body nearly flush against hers now. The air around them was thick with anticipation. The energy between them palpable. Like an invisible thread pulling them together. "It is the gravity of our souls, Evelyn." His voice was low and full of desire. Resonating in the very air between them. "You feel it too, don't you? The pull between us. It's not just physical." He paused, his lips grazing the shell of her ear. His breath warm against her skin. "It's fate. It's the universe itself pulling us together." Evelyn shivered. Her skin alive with the heat of his breath. She had never believed in fate. Not in the way Kale spoke of it. But in that moment. She couldn't deny the truth of his words. Her entire being, her body and soul, seemed to be magnetized by his presence. She felt like she was losing herself. But in the most exquisite way. Like she was falling into a deep, swirling ocean of emotions and sensations. Unable and unwilling to resist. Her hands, almost of their own accord, moved to his chest. Brushing over the intricate alien armor he wore. It was unlike anything human technology could produce. Smooth, yet alive. Responding to his touch with subtle shifts, glowing softly under her fingertips. His body beneath it was like stone, hard and powerful. But there was also an undeniable tenderness in the way he held her. The way he touched her. "I've never felt anything like this before," Evelyn admitted. Her voice trembling as she met his gaze. "But I don't understand. Why is this happening? Why are we drawn to each other like this?" Kale's eyes softened, the intensity of his desire momentarily shifting into something deeper, more vulnerable. He reached up, gently cupping her face, his thumb brushing against her soft skin, tracing the curve of her jaw. "You are more than just human, Evelyn." His voice was quiet now, sincere. "You carry within you a power that transcends your world. It calls to me. I am drawn to you because you are the key, not just to my heart, but to something far larger than either of us." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She didn't understand the weight of his words, but there was something in the way he spoke, in the way his eyes searched hers, that made her believe him. The connection between them wasn't just about attraction. It was about purpose, something far greater than either of them could have anticipated. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kale's fingers trailed down her neck, over her collarbone. As he spoke, his words a soft, seductive promise. "You and I are bound by the stars, Evelyn. This connection is not just about our hearts beating together. It is about the fate of both our worlds. The universe has brought us together for a reason." Evelyn closed her eyes, trying to absorb the depth of what he was saying. She had always been a woman of logic, of science. She didn't believe in fate or destiny, but the way Kale spoke, the way he made her feel, made it hard to deny that something extraordinary was happening between them. It was as if the very fabric of the universe itself was bending around them, pulling them together, despite the vast distance between their worlds. Her hands, still resting against his chest, moved instinctively, her fingers brushing against his hard muscles. She could feel the warmth of his skin beneath the armor, and her body responded to the sensation with a slow, deep ache. Her pulse quickened as Kale's hands moved lower, trailing down her back in a slow, deliberate caress that left a trail of fire in its wake. "Evelyn," Kale murmured her name like a prayer, his voice hoarse with need. "I cannot fight this. I cannot deny it. Can you?" Her heart pounded in her chest, the sound so loud in her ears that it drowned out everything else. She didn't know how to answer him. The pull between them was undeniable. The connection was more than she could comprehend. And yet, in that moment, she couldn't imagine turning away from him. Her body, her heart, her very soul were already entwined with his. And as their lips met again, more fiercely this time, she realized she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid of the unknown, of the alien world, or of Kale. She was simply alive in a way she had never been before. The kiss deepened, filled with an intensity that was both new and familiar, both strange and intoxicating. Evelyn's hands moved up to his neck, pulling him closer as the heat between them grew. As the gravitational force that bound them seemed to expand, the world around them vanished. There was only the feel of Kale's body against hers, the press of his lips against hers, the overwhelming sensation of being consumed by him. In that moment, there were no boundaries, no species, no worlds between them. Just two beings, one human, one alien, joined by forces far older than either of them could understand. And as their bodies collided, the gravity of their desire reached its peak, sweeping them both into a world of sensation that was beyond anything either had ever known. The aftermath of their kiss lingered in the air, like a storm slowly passing. Evelyn's chest heaved as she pulled back, breathless, trying to regain her bearings. Cale's hands, still gently resting on her waist, seemed to pulse with energy, the warmth of his touch lingering on her skin even after he stepped back. The distance between them was short, but it felt monumental in that moment. A physical reminder of the world they both came from, yet also a barrier they were no longer bound by. Her heart was racing, a wild rhythm in her chest that she couldn't control. Every part of her felt alive, heightened, as if every nerve had been awakened by the intensity of their connection. The space between them hummed with unspoken words, the pull of the universe itself still keeping them tethered together. She had never felt so seen, so exposed. Yet, at the same time, so accepted. Cale's gaze softened as he looked at her, his violet eyes glowing with something tender, something real. There was no longer the burning hunger that had driven their first kiss. Only the silent, unspoken understanding that something had shifted between them. Something that went beyond the physical, beyond the surface of their beings. "You are more than just a human, Evelyn." His voice was quieter now, almost reverent. "You have awakened something inside of me that I have never felt before. Something I cannot explain. But it's more than just this physical need between us. It's as though I've been waiting for you." Evelyn blinked, her breath caught in her throat. His words hit her like a wave. And for a moment, she wasn't sure how to respond. The overwhelming rush of emotions, the impossible pull between them, had been more than she could comprehend in one breath. But now, with the quiet weight of Cale's presence surrounding her, she found herself yearning to understand it. To understand him. "Cale," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what this is, what we are. But it feels like something deeper. Like our souls are calling to each other." Cale nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Yes. Exactly." He reached for her hand again, his touch gentle as he lifted it to his chest, placing it over the glowing warmth of his heart. "I have never known another being who could make me feel this way." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as she pressed her palm against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her hand. It was a foreign, unfamiliar sensation. She was from Earth. She was human. But the connection between them transcended that. Transcended everything she had ever known. Cale's voice lowered to a near whisper, the words hanging in the air like a secret shared only between them. "We are not just drawn together by fate, Evelyn. We are connected in a way that binds our very beings." The gravity of his words settled into her chest, like a weight. And she could feel it. Not just in her mind, but in her bones. There was something undeniable between them. Something far more significant than any attraction she had ever felt. Something that went beyond desire. This was deeper. This was destiny. Evelyn took a steadying breath, her gaze lifting to meet his once more. She had always believed that the heart was something that could be understood, something that made logical sense. But this connection, was something different. It was beyond understanding. It was beyond logic. It was a force of nature. A force that pulled at the very essence of who she was. "Kale, I'm not ready for this." She trailed off, unsure how to articulate what she was feeling. Her emotions were a whirlwind, each one battling the other for dominance. She was torn between the desire to fall into the connection between them, and the fear of what it might mean. What would this mean for her? For Earth? For their worlds? Kale took a slow step forward, his expression softening. He seemed to sense her turmoil, the conflict within her. "You do not have to be ready, Evelyn." He spoke the words with a gentle finality, as though the uncertainty in her voice didn't scare him. "This is something that has already happened. It has already begun. And it is bigger than both of us." His words sank into her, like drops of rain on parched earth. She had never expected to feel this way. She had never expected to meet someone like Kale. Someone who seemed to understand the parts of her she didn't even know existed. Someone who made her feel so whole, even in the moments of uncertainty. But the weight of his words, the depth of what he was saying, was not lost on her. This wasn't just about them. This was something bigger. Something the universe had conspired to bring together. But was she ready for it? Could she handle the consequences of a love that was not only forbidden, but could change the course of everything? Kale gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch a quiet comfort amidst the storm swirling inside her. "You do not have to understand it all right now, Evelyn." His thumb stroked the side of her face, grounding her, bringing her focus back to him. "But know this. I will stand by you, always. Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face, I will be by your side." Evelyn's heart fluttered in her chest at his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him with every part of herself. But the fear, the uncertainty. Could she truly give herself to him in a way that felt so complete? So irrevocable? "I don't know if I'm ready to let go of everything I've ever known, Kale," she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you're not like anything I've ever experienced. And I can't deny how I feel about you." Kale's lips curved into a soft, knowing smile. "You don't have to let go of everything, Evelyn." He pressed his forehead against hers, the warmth of his body surrounding hers in a cocoon of intimacy. "But you do need to trust that what we share, what we are, is the start of something new. Something that cannot be stopped." And in that moment, as their foreheads rested against each other, and their breath mingled in the cool alien air, Evelyn realized that no matter the consequences, no matter the fears she still held deep inside, there was no turning back. They had crossed a threshold that neither of them could undo. The gravity between them had become more than just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, and as inevitable as the stars themselves. The air around them was thick with unspoken tension, charged with an energy that seemed to stretch beyond the physical realm. Evelyn's heart beat rapidly, each thump reverberating in her chest, as if it were in sync with the pulse of the alien world they stood on. Kale's presence was overwhelming, enveloping her completely. Yet, there was a comfort in it, a sense of safety she hadn't expected to feel. On a planet so foreign to her. His violet skin shimmered faintly under the light of the twin moons. His eyes glowing with an intensity that made her skin tingle. The weight of his gaze held her captive, as if he were reading the deepest parts of her soul. She could feel the subtle vibrations of his energy, the quiet hum that pulsed beneath his skin, as if his very being was a conduit to the universe's most ancient forces. Kale's breath was slow, steady, and as he leaned in closer, the air between them seemed to vibrate with an electric current. It wasn't just physical attraction anymore. It was something deeper, something raw and unrelenting. Evelyn could feel every cell in her body responding to him, each one waking up, yearning for more. Evelyn, Kale's voice was barely a whisper, his breath warm against her ear, sending a shiver through her entire body. He slowly brushed a lock of her hair behind her ear, his fingers trailing lightly along the curve of her jaw. Let go. Let the universe speak to us. Let it guide us. She felt her breath catch in her throat. His words weren't just a plea, they were a promise. An invitation to something more, something uncharted. The gravitational pull between them intensified, drawing them closer. She couldn't resist it anymore. She didn't want to. Evelyn reached up to touch his face, her fingers grazing the smooth, warm skin of his cheek. His eyes fluttered closed at her touch, a soft sigh escaping his lips. The sensation of his skin beneath hers was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It felt alive, almost sentient, like it was reacting to her touch. His body, strong and firm, pressed closer to hers, the heat of him radiating through the thin barrier of her suit. "Kale," she whispered, her voice shaky with the intensity of the moment. "I don't know if I can, if I'm ready." Kale pulled back just slightly, his eyes searching hers, the depth of his gaze making her feel as though he could see into the very depths of her soul. He seemed to understand her hesitation, the fear in her eyes. And yet, his expression softened. His thumb gently caressed the side of her cheek, his touch tender but full of longing. "You don't have to be ready, Evelyn." His voice was calm, yet filled with a quiet intensity that sent shivers down her spine. "I will wait for you, as long as it takes. But know this. I cannot fight what I feel for you. What we feel for each other." His words struck something deep inside her. The weight of their connection, the overwhelming force of their bond, was undeniable. She could no longer deny it. She could no longer ignore the magnetic pull that had drawn her to him. From the very first moment their eyes had met, she could feel the heat rising in her chest. Her skin flushed with desire, as his lips brushed against her forehead, then down to the soft skin of her temple. Every part of her body seemed to awaken under his touch, her mind clouded by the overwhelming sensations of his proximity. Kale's lips moved to her neck, his breath hot and deep against her skin, making her shiver with anticipation. His hands, large and strong, slid down her back, tracing the contours of her body through the fabric of her suit, leaving a trail of warmth in their wake. The touch was gentle at first, a slow exploration, but the more he touched her, the more she found herself needing him. Every nerve in her body was alive, responding to the primal energy between them. Evelyn closed her eyes, her head tilting back slightly, as she let the sensation of his touch consume her. She felt as though she were floating, caught in a current that swept her deeper into a world of desire and intimacy. Every part of her wanted him, needed him, as though their very souls had been bound together by forces neither of them could understand. "You feel it too, don't you?" Cale murmured against her skin, his voice low and filled with need. His lips traced a path along her neck, sending waves of pleasure and warmth rippling through her body. "The pull between us, it's more than just desire. It's our beings, our energy, coming together. We were always meant to find each other." Evelyn's breath hitched as he moved his lips to hers again, this time with more urgency, more heat. The kiss deepened, a storm of sensation crashing through her, as Cale's hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer. She felt the solid strength of his body against hers, the warmth of him invading every part of her being. It was overwhelming. It was all-consuming. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn didn't want to hold back. She didn't want to fight the pull that was drawing her toward Cale. She wanted to give in, to let go of everything. Of the world, of the fear. And just feel. She responded to his kiss, her hands finding the soft, cool surface of his armor, her fingers grazing over the intricate designs that adorned his body. It was like a delicate dance, each movement feeding the fire that burned between them. His touch was both gentle and insistent, coaxing her, urging her to surrender to the moment. And as their bodies pressed closer, Evelyn could feel the warmth of Cale's desire, the heat of their connection intensifying with every passing second. Her fingers moved to the clasps of her suit, the soft hum of technology responding to her touch. As she slowly loosened the fabric, allowing her body more freedom, Cale's hands moved with hers, his touch reverent, as if he were savoring every moment, every inch of her skin that was revealed. And then, just as their bodies were pressed flush against each other, as if the universe itself had drawn them together in this moment of raw desire and unspoken connection, Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow and quick. She was no longer afraid. She was no longer fighting it. She was with him, body and soul, bound together by something far more powerful than either of them could have ever imagined. In that moment, as Cale's lips met hers once more, time seemed to stand still, the universe holding its breath as they gave into the gravity of their desires. The stars, the planets, and the very fabric of existence seemed to bend and twist around their connection, as though the cosmos itself had conspired to bring them together. And in that silence, in the space between their souls, they finally found each other completely. Evelyn's senses were overwhelmed, drenched in the intensity of Cale's presence. the electric connection between them, and the profound realization that she was standing on the precipice of something far greater than anything she had ever known. Her body still hummed from the kiss, from the energy they shared. A constant, low vibration that filled the air between them, binding them with an unseen thread. As Cale pulled back slightly, his lips tracing one final, lingering touch along her neck, Evelyn felt his breath on her skin. Warm and soothing, but also a little uncertain. She knew that he was giving her space, an unspoken respect for the storm that raged inside her. But she didn't want distance, not anymore. The bond between them was far too powerful for that. Her hands reached up, grasping the edge of his armored chest, pulling him gently back to her. Cale's violet eyes locked with hers, a flicker of surprise in them. But he didn't hesitate. He leaned into her touch, his strong frame pressing against hers once more. The tension between them was undeniable. A tension that wasn't just sexual, but emotional, spiritual. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his gaze. And for the first time, she spoke. Her voice low, trembling slightly with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "I've never felt this before. Not with anyone." Her fingers curled into his armor, as though trying to anchor herself to him in this alien world. "What are we, Cale? What is this between us?" Cale's expression softened, his glowing eyes searching hers, as though trying to gauge her every emotion, every fear, every hope. The universe seemed to pause in the stillness between them. "We are what the universe has made us to be, Evelyn." He leaned down, his lips brushing lightly against her forehead. "I've never experienced anything like this, either. Not in all my years. This connection, this feeling. It goes beyond anything I've known. Beyond species, beyond planets. I know you feel it too." Evelyn nodded, her eyes closing for a moment as she let his words sink in. She could feel it deep in her bones, deep in her very soul. That undeniable, all-consuming connection. She couldn't explain it. No one could. It was simply there. A force that neither of them had any control over. And yet it had brought them together in this extraordinary moment. Her heart raced, as she pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, feeling the raw emotion that surged through her. "You're right. I feel it. But I'm scared." She exhaled a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if this isn't real? What if I'm just imagining it?" Cale's hand moved to her cheek, his thumb softly tracing her jawline, as if trying to ground her, to reassure her. "It's real." His voice was firm, confident, but laced with a tenderness that made Evelyn's heart swell. "I feel it in every fiber of my being, Evelyn. And I will not let you doubt it. Not now, not ever." His words wrapped around her, pulling her in. And she realized then that she wasn't afraid anymore. She was frightened, yes. Of the unknown, of what this connection could mean for her life. For her humanity, for everything she had ever known. But the fear was no longer paralyzing. It was just a part of the process. Part of the journey she was embarking on with Kale. As if sensing her resolve, Kale leaned down again, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was tender yet full of longing. His hands moved to her back, pulling her closer. And Evelyn responded instinctively, her body pressing against his, feeling the strength of him, the warmth of his touch. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about the consequences. She wasn't thinking about Earth, or the mission, or the alien planet beneath them. She was only thinking about him. About the way his lips felt against hers. About the way his body seemed to fit so perfectly against hers. As though they were two halves of a whole. Finally reunited after millennia apart. Kale's hand slid to her waist. His touch both possessive and gentle. As he pulled her even closer. If that were even possible. The sensation of his body against hers sent sparks through her every nerve. Awakening parts of herself she had never known existed. The warmth of him, the undeniable heat between them, was intoxicating. Evelyn. Kale murmured against her lips, his voice heavy with desire, but also with something more. There was a weight in his words, a deep understanding that this moment, this connection, was something that could never be undone. You are everything I've been searching for, everything I never knew I needed. Her heart skipped a beat at his words. And Evelyn found herself lost in his eyes again. The intensity of his gaze holding her captive. She could see the truth in them. The honesty that mirrored her own feelings. No matter how impossible it seemed. I don't know how to explain this, Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking slightly as she took a step back. Needing a moment to breathe. She was shaking, not with fear, but with the overwhelming force of her emotions. She had never been this open, this vulnerable. Never with anyone, never like this. But with you, everything feels right. Even when it feels wrong. Kale stepped back just enough to look at her fully. His gaze softening. It is right, Evelyn. And it will always be. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing the side of her face. What we have is not just a connection. It's a bond. A soul-deep connection that no force, no fear, can sever. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the truth of his words wash over her. The universe had brought them together. Not just because of their physical attraction, but because of something far more significant. Something deeper. As Kale's fingers trailed down her arm, his touch sent a trail of warmth that seemed to ignite every nerve in her body. The bond between them was undeniable. A thread woven through the very fabric of their existence. And Evelyn knew, in that moment, that she was no longer just a human from Earth. She was something more. She was part of a story that spanned the stars. A story written in the very universe itself. And as she looked into Kale's eyes, she realized that she wasn't alone anymore. This was not just a fleeting moment. This was the beginning of something far greater than either of them could ever understand. The silence between them spoke louder than any words could. It was the silence of understanding. The silence of two souls awakened. The silence of two hearts that had been destined to beat together. From the very beginning, Evelyn stood at the edge of everything she had ever known. And yet it felt as if the universe had expanded around her, creating a space where only Kale and her existed. There was no longer the burden of time. No ticking clock, no boundary between her past and her present. All that mattered now was this moment. The weight of Kale's presence. The undeniable pull between them. And the knowledge that their souls were entwined in a way she could no longer ignore. Kale, standing before her, seemed to radiate an aura of both power and peace. His form, tall and muscular, gleamed under the alien moons. And his violet skin pulsed with an energy that Evelyn could almost feel in her very core. His eyes, those glowing pools of deep light, watched her with an intensity that felt like both a challenge and a promise. There was a knowing in him, an understanding that stretched across the stars, a depth of experience she could not fathom, but could feel nonetheless. Her breath came in short bursts as she took a step toward him, drawn to him in a way that was entirely beyond her control. The uncertainty that had once plagued her was slipping away, replaced by a sense of inevitability. Kale was not just another being from another world. He was her connection to something far larger. She could feel it now. Feel the energy, the force that was pulling them closer. Without a word, Kale reached out, his hand extending to hers in an invitation she couldn't resist. As their hands met, the familiar surge of electricity coursed through her. Stronger than before. The warmth of his touch enveloped her, and she could feel her pulse racing in time with his own. The world around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them. Their connection undeniable, and undeniable. Kale's fingers traced the delicate curve of her wrist, before sliding up her arm, sending shivers of desire down her spine. His touch was slow, deliberate, as though savoring each moment they shared. When he pulled her closer, the space between them closed, and she could feel the heat of his body, his strong chest rising and falling with each breath he took. Evelyn. His voice, deep and resonant, rumbled against her ear. It was filled with a yearning that mirrored her own. A hunger that was not just for the physical, but for something far more profound. You are everything I never knew I needed. I never thought I would find someone like you. Not in all my years. Evelyn's heart thudded in her chest, her pulse quickening as his lips brushed against her ear. His words filled her with an aching warmth, but also with something else. Something darker, something deeper. She could feel the fire inside her grow hotter with each passing second. She had never felt so wanted, so completely consumed by another person. And I? Evelyn whispered, her voice faltering as she struggled to find the right words. But the truth was simple, undeniable. And as her hand moved to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, she spoke it with certainty. I've never felt more alive than I do right now, Kale. A soft growl rumbled from Kale's chest, a sound of both longing and desire. He pressed his lips against her forehead, his breath hot against her skin. I feel it too, Evelyn. More than you know. His hand moved to her back, pulling her into him. and their bodies collided once again. The connection between them intense, all-consuming. She could feel the raw, unrestrained desire building in both of them. A fire that had been ignited the moment they met. There was no turning back now. As their lips finally met again, the kiss was no longer tentative. It was hungry, fierce, desperate. A desperate yearning to merge their worlds. To bridge the gap between the alien and the human. Between the unknown and the known. The stars above seemed to hold their breath, as they lost themselves in each other. Each kiss deeper, more urgent than the last. Evelyn felt herself losing control. Her body betraying her as the heat between them grew unbearably intense. Cale's hands moved to her hips, guiding her back against the rocky terrain. The cool, alien earth beneath her felt distant compared to the warmth of Cale's body pressing into hers. His lips trailed down her neck, his breath warm against her skin, causing her body to tremble with anticipation. Evelyn's hands ran over the hard planes of his chest, exploring every inch of him, marveling at the unfamiliar textures of his alien form. As she kissed him again, deeper this time, Evelyn felt the heat building between them. A heat that was unlike anything she had ever known. She could feel it in every cell of her body. The pull, the desire. There was no longer any doubt in her mind. She wasn't just giving herself to him physically. She was giving him every part of her soul. She could feel him pulling at her, reaching deep within her being, awakening parts of herself that had remained dormant her entire life. In that moment, everything faded away. Earth, the mission, even the alien planet beneath them. There was nothing but the two of them, lost in the gravity of their union, entwined in a way that was as natural as the stars themselves. Cale, Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking with the intensity of her emotions. Take me. Her words were like a release, a surrender. And Cale responded with a primal growl, his hands moving swiftly to remove the barriers between them. The world around them seemed to disappear, the air thick with desire, and the undeniable force of the bond that had been forged between them. It was more than just a physical connection. It was a union of souls, of energies, of destinies that had collided in this moment. The kiss deepened, and Evelyn's body responded instinctively, her fingers moving to his armor, tearing at the pieces that separated them. She wanted to feel him, his warmth, his strength, the energy that radiated from him. She wanted to merge with him in every possible way, to lose herself in the pull of their souls. Cale's body tensed beneath her touch, his breath sharp and quick, as he responded with equal urgency. Their connection had moved beyond words, beyond physicality. It had become something sacred, something ancient and eternal. They were bound by a force that neither of them could explain. But they didn't need to. It was enough to simply feel it, to be in the moment, together. And as their bodies finally came together, as their souls intertwined in a cosmic dance of desire and connection, Evelyn knew deep in her heart that she had crossed a threshold that would change her forever. There was no going back. They were no longer just a human and an alien. They were something more. something greater than either of them could have imagined. They were, in that moment, one. And the universe, with all its secrets and wonders, seemed to stand still in awe of their union. Their kiss, their union, held the power to shift worlds. The stars themselves seemed to bear witness to the forbidden love that had blossomed between two souls from two different worlds, bound together by fate, desire, and the cosmic forces that brought them to this moment. The moment their bodies united, everything else ceased to exist. Time itself bent around them, suspended in the vast silence of the universe. There was no past. There was no future. There was only this, the undeniable, unstoppable force of their union. Kale's hands moved with a certain tenderness and urgency, his touch both gentle and commanding, as if he had waited eons for this moment. Evelyn could feel his energy coursing through her, a warmth that reached deep inside her soul, igniting every cell of her being. His kiss deepened, soft at first, but soon growing in intensity. A passionate exchange of breath, warmth, and raw, unfiltered connection. Their lips met with an urgency that spoke of everything they had both denied, everything they had been running from. They were no longer just two beings, human and alien, but two souls fused into one. Evelyn's breath caught as she moved against him, her body pressing into his, feeling the solid strength of him, the heat that radiated from his skin. Her hands roamed over his form, exploring every inch of the unfamiliar, every curve and angle that made up his otherworldly physique. His skin was warm, alive, and beneath it, there was a pulsating energy, an energy that called to her, resonated with her own heartbeat. As they moved together, Evelyn could feel the very fabric of her being unraveling. Her thoughts scattered like stardust in the vastness of the universe. There was no fear, no hesitation. Only the overwhelming force of their connection. Every touch, every kiss, seemed to pull them deeper into a realm where nothing mattered but the two of them. Their hearts, their souls, intertwined forever. Kale's hand slid to her waist, drawing her even closer, his body moving in perfect harmony with hers, as if they were two halves of a whole, coming together after eons of separation. His lips moved from hers to her neck, his breath hot and ragged against her skin, sending shivers through her body. Evelyn, Kale's voice, hoarse and raw with desire, filled the space between them. His words like a prayer, an invocation. I have waited for you. We were always meant to be. The universe itself has brought us together, and I will never let you go. Evelyn's eyes fluttered closed as she let his words sink into her. They were more than just words. They were a promise, an unbreakable bond that transcended everything. She knew, in the deepest parts of her soul, that this was not just a moment of passion, but a union that was written in the stars, a force that neither of them could escape. Her hands gripped his shoulders as she pulled him closer, her body yearning for the connection, for the completeness he offered. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady beneath her palm, the pulse of his energy syncing with her own. There was no fear, no doubt anymore. She wasn't just a human from Earth. She was something more. Something bound to Kale by a force greater than time or space. As they moved together in a rhythm that was both tender and wild, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The very stars above them appeared to shimmer more brightly, as if acknowledging the sacredness of the bond they were forming. The alien planet beneath them seemed to pulse with the energy of their connection. The ground beneath their feet alive with a deep, resonant hum that echoed through their bodies. The kiss, the touch, the shared heartbeat. It was more than just physical. It was spiritual, it was emotional. And in that moment, Evelyn knew that she was no longer just an individual. She was part of something greater. She was part of a destiny that spanned galaxies. A love that would transcend all boundaries. As their bodies finally came together in the most intimate, vulnerable way, Evelyn felt the weight of the universe lift from her shoulders. It was as though every worry, every fear, every doubt she had ever carried had melted away. There was no more questioning, no more uncertainty. There was only Kale. There was only the undeniable truth of their union. Kale's arms wrapped around her, holding her close as their bodies moved together. With a unity that transcended language, transcended species. They were one. And as their connection deepened, the world around them blurred, becoming nothing more than a distant memory. There was only the feeling of their souls entwining, of two beings from different worlds coming together to create something new. This is it. Kale's voice came softly, almost reverently, as his lips brushed against her forehead. We are one now, Evelyn. Forever. Tears stung the corners of Evelyn's eyes, though she couldn't say why. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't pain. It was the sheer weight of everything they had shared, everything they had become together. She had never imagined that a single moment could change everything. But as Kale's arms held her tight, as their bodies continued to move in perfect harmony, she realized that the universe itself had conspired to bring them together. And now, nothing could ever tear them apart. Kale's hands moved gently along her back, his touch soft yet filled with a fierce need that mirrored her own. He kissed her again. The kiss deep and meaningful, filled with every emotion they had yet to express. It was a promise, a declaration, a bond that neither of them could deny. For the first time in her life, Evelyn felt complete. Not because of who she was on Earth, but because of the universe, because of Kale. Because of the connection between them that transcended everything. She was no longer just a woman lost in space. She was a part of something eternal. And as they reached the height of their connection, the world around them faded into the background. There was no more past, no more future. There was only the now that had brought them to this point. To this place, to this moment in time. They were bound by something greater than themselves. Something ancient and eternal. And in that moment, as they became one, the universe seemed to acknowledge their union, their love, their destiny. The stars shone brighter, and the galaxy itself seemed to breathe in time with their hearts. They were no longer just two beings from different worlds. They were one. And their love was an unbreakable bond. destined to last forever across time, across galaxies, across every boundary the universe could place before them. In the final moments, as we stood together under the stars, with the space between us shrinking to nothing but a tiny point of light in the universe, I understood something profound. Love doesn't need an explanation. Sometimes, the things that defy logic are the things that last forever. And so, we stayed together, bound not by space or time, but by something far stronger. But the real twist came when I realized, after everything we overcame, the truth wasn't in where he came from. It was in what he taught me. That love can come from anywhere, even from places we can't imagine. And it will take us to places we've never dared dream of. So, this story ends. Or is it just the beginning of a much longer journey? Maybe our hearts have found each other now. But there's so much more out there to discover. Who knows where the next chapter will take us? Or if we'll find others out there, as lost and searching as we once were. But here's the question I leave you with. Can love truly have no boundaries? Will humanity one day reach out and find love in other worlds? Or is it just a dream, a mere fantasy? The answer may never come. But what we've explored today is just the beginning. If this journey resonated with you, if you feel that tug in your heart like I did, consider subscribing to Intergalactic Hearts. Join us as we explore the vast, uncharted realms of love that stretch beyond the stars. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think? Could love really exist beyond Earth? Let's discover it together. You're one of the first 1,000 explorers who will shape the future of this journey. Remember, this is just the beginning. You are part of something extraordinary. And I can't wait to continue this adventure with you. Subscribe now. And let's make this cosmic love story our own.